A U.S. official saying Iranian security forces may have killed more than 1,000 people since protests over gas price hikes started in mid-November. To retired Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin now for more on this. General, I want to get to Iran, but I do want to say that right now the president is speaking. He's got representatives of the UN Security Council in the White House, and we're getting reports from the scrum, as we call it, a group of reporters. As soon as we get that tape playback, we'll show it to you. But he's talking about his success at NATO. Now, of course, the mainstream media, General, was all about this off-camera session that the Canadian Prime Minister and others had, suggesting that it was some kind of a joke, the president's NATO meeting. But it was pretty successful, was it not?
Yeah, I think it was. And I think that we need to understand that President Trump, unlike any president before him, has really been able to get NATO to step up to the plate and start paying their dues. And I think that even though they make fun of him, people like Macron, who I think is a sad character himself, they make fun of Donald Trump. I think they also respect Donald Trump because nobody's had the courage to stand up in front of these other NATO leaders and say, you're freeloading. It is time for you to pay your dues. You know, the Obama administration officials apparently are going to make hay with this video that we're seeing in some way to help them in the 2020 election campaign. But, you know, because they say, well, President Obama was respected and loved overseas. He did receive a Nobel Peace Prize before he did anything. So, I mean, sometimes it's better to be feared and ridiculed than loved by our foreign allies, right? Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, these leaders, first of all, some of them are so totally out of touch with the realities of the threats that NATO is confronting today. And they have been so bogged down in economic problems in many of these countries today that NATO has not been on their radar screen. And NATO, I think, is still today, continues to be a very important entity, not only on the continent of Europe, but in the world itself. And keep in mind that we've got allies like Turkey. Turkey is a major factor in not only in the Middle East, but also in the European theater. Well, let's talk about one place where we've been bogged down for a while. There's been a lot of American blood and treasure spilled in Iraq. A lot of us know very personally, having family members go over there and fight in various wars. And yet it appears that the Iranians now have a strong foothold in Iraq. What's happening with that? Well, look, this is not new, David. I know it's just being reported again, but in August of 2018, we had reports that they were also moving missiles, short-range missiles, into Iraq. There should be no surprise here. 60% of the Iraqis are Shia Muslims. They have been dominated by Iran ever since, ever since the United States got in there. And these Shia militias, which are a major issue there, inside Iraq, these Shia militias are very dangerous. They've killed a lot of Kurds. They've killed a lot of Christians and Yazidis. And it is time, I think, for the United States to take some tough measures with the Iraqis for letting them continue to dominate the landscape there in Iraq. Now, meanwhile, as I mentioned in my introduction to you, the fact that there are apparently 1,000 people have been killed in Iran, they're having terrible trouble. As we put the screws on Iranian economy, it seems to be having a lot of effect on the unpopularity of the government there. We just heard that the president in his scrum just said that the American people stand behind the Iranian people. Where do you think that goes? Is it conceivable that there could be an uprising that brings down the caliphate, as I would call it, in Iran? It's a long shot, David, and the reason it's a long shot is because the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is very, very powerful. They're the only ones that are armed inside that nation. And unless you really have more of a ideological uprising and you can turn the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, to the side of the protesters, it just isn't going to happen because they have too much control, too much power. And the reality is their power is probably equal to that of the Supreme Council, the mullahs. Yeah. Great stuff, Lieutenant General. Thank you very much for being with us. Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin. Thank you. On the situation in Iran, a lot of other parts of the world that need the help of our military.